Everyone. Welcome to the New York Sun Inclusive Community Solar Adder presentation. This afternoon, we'll be going through the responses to our request for information and discussing the proposed final program design. My name is Max Joel. I'm the program manager for the New York Sun initiative at NYSERDA. And today I'll be joined in presenting by my colleague, Sarah Jayanthi. Before we get started, I'd also like to recognize and thank the NYSERDA events and IT staff that have helped set up this webinar. We are expecting a significant number of attendees, so everyone will be muted during the presentation. Next slide, please. So some other housekeeping before we get into the main presentation. As I noted, everyone will be muted. Questions and comments can be submitted through the Q&A function on the right-hand side. I'll note that today we are really going to focus on questions about clarifying what has been in the presentation. As we'll discuss at the end, this won't be by no means the final opportunity for stakeholders to give us feedback or discuss some of the proposed final design with New York Sun staff. But for today, since we have limited time, I'd like to ask everyone to really focus on clarifying questions and then follow up by email and phone later in the way we'll describe at the end of the presentation. I'll also note that this webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting it online as quickly as possible and sending out an email to everyone who registered with that link. Finally, if you are having technical problems, if your sound cuts out, if there's other issues, please email my colleague Sal at this email address and we can provide support. Next slide, please. So on today's webinar, we'll be providing a brief overview of the Inclusive Community Solar Adder and the process and analysis that's gone into designing the program. And then we'll really be going into detail on the proposed final program design. So for each of these sections, we'll be briefly reviewing the straw proposal that was in the RFI. We'll be discussing the responses that NYSERDA received to the RFI, and then we'll be providing details on how we propose to move forward with the program. And then at the end, we'll talk about next steps and how additional feedback can be provided prior to the program launch. Next slide, please. The goal of the Inclusive Community Solar Adder is to increase access to community solar for low and moderate income households, primarily to help people save money on their electric bills. As we discussed in the straw proposal, we also have an element of reducing operating costs for affordable housing and nonprofits serving disadvantaged communities. This program is a part of the Solar Energy Equity Framework that was approved in May 2020 and is intended to fit into the existing New York Sun program structure and CDG program rules. As we'll discuss, eligible subscribers under the program include low and moderate income residential subscribers, but also affordable housing and other facilities serving disadvantaged communities. Finally, our intention is that this program will, between now and the end of the New York Sun Initiative in 2025, have a major impact, serving between 25 and 50,000 LMI households and helping incentivize between 250 and 500 megawatts of community solar. Next slide, please. This slide reviews the development timeline to date. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, this program was approved as part of the Solar Energy Equity Framework. I'll note that the framework and the Inclusive Community Solar Adder were included in the November 2019 petition to the Public Service Commission that expanded the New York Sun program and proposed this funding and was subject to public comment at that time. After we received the order in May of 2020, we did the initial program design, presented a webinar on that initial design in September 2020 and received a lot of really outstanding feedback then, both at that webinar and in follow-up conversations. We adjusted the program on a first iteration of changes accordingly, and then released a detailed request for information and straw proposal in December. We received 35 responses to that RFI, which is a really outstanding result from our perspective, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that later. And then finally, some of the RFI responses were, very detailed and insightful, and we scheduled a number of follow-up conversations to make sure we were understanding them correctly and getting all the detail we could. Next slide, please. So before we go into the RFI results and the proposed program design, I do want to speak briefly to another track of analysis that we've conducted to help shape this program, which is a look at the demographics, particularly the income distribution of solar customers in New York. So this is, I believe, relatively new information. We just wrapped up this analysis. So in order to go a little more in depth than we had in the past, we collected anonymized locational data from as many residential solar participants as we could. Those include residential rooftop customers, including participants in our affordable solar program, which provides added incentives for low and moderate income homeowners. That included all the participants in our Solar for All program, which is an existing low-income community solar program available in the upstate utility territories. And we also got a very large sample of anonymized locational data from on market rate community solar subscribers from 7 of the larger providers upstate. So we took a geographic approach and checked how these data sets combined with the interim disadvantaged communities established by the CAC, as well as the HUD, Housing and Urban Development, LMI data tabulations, which provides an even more in-depth look at income distributions geographically. For our rooftop customers, because we have their contact information, we were able to send surveys directly to thousands of program participants and got a really in-depth look at demographics that way as well. Next slide, please. So here's some of the key results, really focusing in on residents in disadvantaged communities. So as you can see, it's a relatively small percentage of community solar subscribers to date that reside in disadvantaged communities. And interestingly, that's a similar percentage to the residential rooftop customers, 8% each. And that's significantly below the percentage of the population as a whole. I'll also point out an interesting finding here that even among Solar for All participants, all of whom are low income and have their income individually verified by NYSERDA, only a quarter of those individuals lived in disadvantaged communities, and an even lower percentage for the LMI homeowners who participate in affordable solar. Next slide, please. So this drove some of our conclusions on how to manage eligibility for the program we're discussing today. Again, we found that similar geographic distribution between rooftop and community solar customers. Interestingly, we found with a really high degree of confidence that about 15% of all residential rooftop solar customers are low to moderate income, meaning they have a household income below 80% of area median income. That's a relatively high number, and we're kind of an important data point for us. We also just found a very high reliability with our customer surveys. but finally concluded that geo-eligibility alone is a challenging way and a limited way to determine demographics. So we are going to be using that approach, but with some additional components, which we'll describe later. But finally, we do really think that geo-eligibility has value because it reduces the verification burden on both individual customers and on project developers. And it's a good way to target particular communities that have been underserved. Next slide, please. So getting into the RFI response, once again, we just received an outstanding response to this RFI. And, in many ways, the final bullet on the slide is one of the most important in the whole presentation. Uh, Very sincere thanks to everyone who put in the time and effort to respond. It is absolutely invaluable to our program design to have that kind of detailed feedback, detailed information. Some people provided a great deal of data, cost data, project information. And that's really helped shape the program design you'll see today. So, thank you again. I really encourage everyone to, continue to participate in that way with future RFIs and inquiries from NYSERDA. Next slide, please. So in this part of the presentation, I'll be getting into some of the key program design areas, and I'll then be handing it off to my colleague, Sarah Jayanthe, to discuss some of the other requirements. And again, in each section, briefly touch on the original straw proposal, discuss the responses, and then go into some of the proposed final design. Next slide, please. So project eligibility, we initially proposed a more limited project eligibility, only projects upstate that had received the community adder were proposed to be eligible. Um, and if we could go to the next slide. Our RFI responses were quite varied. Some agreed with our initial proposal that it only be new projects and community adder recipients upstate. Many recommended that we include older pipeline projects in the interest of delivering benefits more quickly to more low and moderate income households. Some even proposed that we allow projects that were already operational to uh, join the program. We got some specific questions about community choice aggregation and some other special use cases, and we received comments from environmental justice advocates and some community nonprofits to provide a greater focus on community-led projects. Next slide, please. So the proposed final design simplifies our original proposal. All pipeline projects will be eligible under what we're proposing today. But as we'll discuss a little later, we'll have different adder levels or tiers for different kinds of projects, community credit versus community adder, for example. Projects can apply for the adder up until commercial operation. So that, we received a lot of feedback about, uh, CDG providers, really needing the time to align their marketing and customer acquisition with this new strategy. But operational projects will not be eligible. That wasn't something we could offer. I'll note that as I mentioned on the previous slide, we received feedback around community-led projects. We are continuing to pursue that with some of the organizations and individuals who provided those comments, but don't have more details at this time. Next slide, please. So getting next into subscriber requirements, who would be considered eligible for these projects. We had a relatively complex formula in the original straw proposal copied below. I certainly won't read through this line by line. Next slide, please. Oh, and I apologize. I just kept on going. I believe this is the part of the presentation where I'm supposed to hand it off to my colleague, Sarah Jayanthi. Apologies, Sarah, I got on a roll there.
Not a problem, Max. I'm happy to have you do it, but I'm sure you'd appreciate that I would do this section. So actually, if you can go to the previous slide, I'll start over. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So, I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Sarah Jayanthi, and I'm a project manager on the New York Sun team. As Max mentioned, I will be talking about the subscriber requirements, the eligible subscriber definitions, and other requirements for the ICSA. I will start by saying that this section is pretty dense, so I will go as slow as possible, but please feel free to ask any clarifying questions in the Q&A if there's anything that you don't understand. So what you see here is what we put in the straw proposal for subscriber requirements. In the straw proposal, we proposed two different customer mix options for eligibility to receive the adder. Option 1 requires that it would only be a residential only allocation, and option 2 proposed a mix of residential and non-residential subscribers would be eligible. We also proposed minimum allocation amount and a maximum allocation amount. And the minimum allocation amount and maximum allocation amount we proposed would differ between upstate and downstate. We also proposed that projects who could hit the maximum allocation amount would get a higher incentive, and that incentive would be sliding. Next slide, please. So for the definitions of eligible subscribers, as I mentioned, we proposed two different customer types, residential and non-residential. In our straw proposal, we listed that the eligible residential subscribers had to have residential electric utility customer accounts. So that includes residences of multifamily buildings that pay their own electric bill, or this could also include sub-meter residents if the savings passes through directly to the customer. The other eligibility requirement is that these residential customers need to be income eligible. So they need to either live in a designated disadvantaged community, or they need to have a documented household income of under 80% AMI or SMI, whichever is higher. For non-residential subscribers, in the straw proposal, we listed that any regulated affordable housing would be eligible as a non-residential subscriber. But we also knew that this was not enough and requested that stakeholders provide us feedback on how best to define and determine the eligibility of these non-residential subscribers outside of just affordable housing. Next slide, please. So what did we hear in the responses? Across the board, we received broad, strong support for a more inclusive non-residential subscriber definition. We also heard interest and encouragement for reduced income verification across the board. With that being said, there was a mixed response for geo-eligibility. Some were strongly in favor, while others cautioned blanket use, citing the concern that demographics of some communities have changed faster than what the maps are showing us. We had a few suggest attestation. So for anyone who does not know what attestation is, that is when a customer can just certify that they are low income on an application, and it would be up to the organization taking the application in to ensure the validity. Self-attestation has been part of many programs across the country. Famously, California's CARE program has been doing it for about 10 years, so there is precedent for using this method. We also heard that our minimum LMI allocation requirements should be the same as upstate and downstate. And finally, we heard that when deciding the minimum and maximum percent of eligible subscribers, we should consider the constraints that are faced by projects, especially that projects with higher LMI household subscribers have traditionally been more difficult to finance. So next slide. So what we are proposing, based on the feedback from stakeholders, is the following. Projects upstate and downstate will now have the same minimum and maximum allocation requirements. The minimum will be set at 20% residential customers, and the adder will now ramp up to 100% of eligible subscribers. So projects that are able to secure 100% of eligible subscribers, either using option 1, which is residential only, or option 2, which is a residential, non-residential mix, will get the highest adder that is available. Our proposed 2 different subscriber mixes, as I mentioned above, residential only and a mix of residential and non-residential, will stay the same. Our residential subscriber definition will also stay the same. So we're not making any changes to what a eligible residential subscriber will be. We are, however, expanding the eligible non-residential subscriber definition. It will still include affordable housing properties, but will also include small, non-demand metered nonprofit entities that are located in disadvantaged communities. We are very interested in expanding this non-residential subscriber definition even more, in particular to small business entities located within disadvantaged communities. We plan to do that at a later date, but please reach out if you have suggestions on how to do that, and you can use the feedback process, which I'll discuss later, to give us some suggestions. Next slide, please. So an important element of this subscriber definition and requirements section is how a project will actually be able to verify if a residential customer is eligible. So from our experience running Solar for All, we know firsthand how challenging it can be to ask a customer to verify their income eligibility. It is cumbersome and frustrating for both the customer and the entity asking for the information. So based on that experience and from the feedback we heard from stakeholders, we are proposing 4 pathways that a project can use to validate the income eligibility of their residential customers. The first pathway is categorical eligibility. What this means is that if a customer is already part of SNAP, already part of HEAP, if they can verify they are already part of that program, then they have verified their income eligibility. So for example, if a customer shows you their utility bill and HEAP is listed as a line item, that is enough for categorical eligibility. We are not asking you to collect tax returns or pay stubs. A utility bill with a HEAP line item, an award letter from Social Security, that is what is needed for pathway number 1. The second pathway is the geo-verification plus self-attestation. So as Max said, our customer demographics analysis showed us that there are limits to what can be done with geo-eligibility. So we are going to use it in a limited way. The interim disadvantaged community maps will be used to identify geo-eligible areas, and the provider must include self-attestation language on the application if they are going to use geo-verification. The third pathway is affordable housing residential eligibility. What this means is that if a developer can demonstrate that a property meets the eligibility requirements of NYSERDA's multifamily affordable housing adder, then all of the residents living in that property will be deemed eligible residential subscribers, provided those residential customers are paying their own electricity bills. So for example, like if you were doing this with a master metered building, those residential customers wouldn't qualify under this, but that master metered building could be a non-residential subscriber since there's only one electric account. And then finally, we have our 4th pathway, which is where you can propose your own income verification process. So we are open to other income verification pathways other than the ones that we have proposed, and NYSERDA will screen any proposed pathway for ease of customer use, statistical weight, and accuracy before we approve it as a way to verify income. Next slide, please. So the next consideration for income verification is how will NYSERDA verify that the projects are abiding by our income verification requirements. So in order to receive the adder, providers will be required to submit the names, addresses, and contact information of all subscribers to any project that's receiving the adder. That includes the eligible residential, eligible non-residential, and market rate subscribers. I'm going to say this again because this is very important and I just want to make sure I've expressed it clearly. All subscribers must be submitted to NYSERDA of a project that receives the adder. Eligible residential, the eligible non-residential, and the market rate subscribers. And when a provider submits the customer when a provider submits the customer information, you will need to include what pathway, either 1, 2, 3, or 4, that you use to verify the customers that you have deemed income eligible. Contractors will also be required to maintain any relevant backup eligibility documentation and provide that to NYSERDA upon request, and those periodic audits will be random. Any misrepresentation of subscribers' eligibility will result in the project and/or the contractor being removed from the ICSA program. So this is important. Under no circumstances will the subscriber be penalized. Consequences for misrepresentation will fall on the provider. NYSERDA will also be surveying subscribers to evaluate the effectiveness of this program. This is already something that we do for the residential rooftop program, so there is precedence here. I just want to say that our income verification process is designed to ensure that we effectively deliver benefits to the intended customers that this adder should support, the low to moderate income households and disadvantaged communities of the state of New York. We are asking for the support and participation of providers so that we can ensure increasing access to community solar with minimal process burden on the customer. With all of that being said, we are also committed to making sure that this verification process is easier for you, and we will need full support from the industry to make that possible. So Max mentioned we did a survey of the residential solar and affordable solar customers that are part of the residential solar and affordable solar customers who have rooftop solar. So we will soon be reaching out to partner with us on conducting a similar survey with the current CDG customers across the state. And participation in that survey would be so helpful to help us collect the data that we need to build on the customer demographics work that we started, and really to further optimize and simplify the income verification process. Next slide, please. So the final section that I will be talking about before I hand it back to Max is the other requirements that were in the straw proposal. So for these other requirements, we proposed that no project would be allowed to request FICO scores from customers. We also proposed that projects would be required to provide a sample contract that will be given to eligible subscribers, and for that sample contract to include guaranteed savings and meet all the requirements of the UBP-DERS. We also proposed that providers would need to submit a marketing plan that describes how eligible residential customers will be engaged by the project. Next slide, please. So the feedback that we've received is that everyone universally agreed that FICO scores should not be allowed. We also heard that stakeholders are open to submitting marketing plans, but clear criteria is needed. And we also heard that clear and accurate marketing should be required, as these customers had had a very bad experience with predatory ESCOs in the past, and we don't want history to repeat itself. Next slide, please. And so here is our final proposed design for the other requirements. We will not allow FICO scores to determine eligibility. That remains the same. What will also remain the same is that a sample contract must be submitted to NYSERDA, and the terms must comply with the UBP-DERS. We will also be requiring that all projects offer customers a minimum guaranteed savings of 10%, and we strongly encourage more. We heard from stakeholders that this adder should require a guaranteed savings amount that is higher than the current market rate of 10%. Unfortunately, due to a provision in the net crediting order, only one discount can be applied for an entire project. So for example, if a provider opts to have 30% of their subscribers as income eligible subscribers, we at NYSERDA cannot require that the income eligible customers should have a higher guaranteed savings than the market rate customers. The percent guaranteed savings has to be the same for all customers across the entire project. So what has also changed is that NYSERDA has expanded on the marketing plan, and we will now be requiring the submission of an implementation plan. This implementation plan includes the original marketing plan with details on how a provider will reach out to the customer, the target geographies they plan to reach, and example marketing materials. The plan must also indicate what % of eligible subscribers they are targeting to sign up. The implementation plan also needs to describe your sales process and subscriber management process, and it should include any community benefits that will be associated with the project, such as local hiring or partnerships with community organizations. Finally, we recognize that there will be a lot of questions about what these implementation plans need to look like. So we will be providing guidance on what the implementation plan should include when we roll out the adder. If there are specific elements that you think are important for us to provide guidance on, please let us know through that final feedback process that I will go over later. But for now, I will hand it back to Max, who will talk about the incentive levels and the payment processes. So take it away, Max.
All right, thank you very much, Sarah. So in the straw proposal, we put out a general range of 5 to 10 cents per watt DC for the portion of the project allocated to eligible subscribers. Next slide, please. So we got, as you might imagine, a great deal of response to this question. We received a number of comments that that incentive range was not high enough for projects that did not have a community adder or a community credit. So these would be more recent projects in the upstate utility territories. That is certainly understood. And on the next slide, we'll be addressing that. Generally, for the responses that spoke to projects that do have a community credit or community adder, especially for folks who responded with some experience in customer acquisition and management, including for low and moderate income customers. The responses that range was appropriate. We also got a number of comments suggesting higher percentages allowing higher percentages of customers to be served, which we addressed in the project rules. Higher guaranteed savings resulting in higher incentive levels, which I think Sarah partially addressed, as well as higher incentive levels for projects cited in environmental justice communities, which I'll speak to in just a minute. We did get a number of concerns about the overall incentive structure, mainly about how the incentive benefit can flow to LMI households in terms of the savings, and then also some comments about broader benefits to disadvantaged communities, such as job growth in those communities. Next slide, please. So what we've developed for the proposed design is a block system for the incentive levels divided into 3 main categories. Projects upstate, meaning served in the investor-owned utilities north of Con Ed, so that's Orange and Rockland, Central Hudson, NYSEG, RG&E, and National Grid. One category for those projects that receive the MTC community credit, or in some cases phase 1 net metering. Another category for projects upstate receiving the community adder, and then Con Ed in its own category with dedicated capacity blocks of incentive for each project type. We've developed a bonus incentive proposal for projects cited in environmental justice communities that are burdened by electric power generating facilities. And to enable us to provide the incentive up to 100% of the project, we are setting this up so that project applications must identify and justify their targeted range of eligible subscribers. So if for example, if a project developer feels that they have a good plan in place to meet the minimum requirement of 20%, ideally, go above that, they would apply in the 20 to 40% um, range. Whereas if a project was planning to dedicate all of its capacity to eligible subscribers, that's the model of the developer or the organization putting forth the project, they would apply in the 80 to 100% range, and with additional buckets in between. Next slide, please. So one item that wasn't addressed in the straw proposal, but we received some really good feedback on, is the value of community solar, specifically in environmental justice communities that are historically burdened by pollution from power generation. The comments that we received specifically pointed to areas in New York City in proximity to generating facilities and including peaker power plants. So what we proposed here is a bonus incentive of an additional 10 cents a watt. Going up to 20 cents a watt total. We'll address that Con Ed incentive in just a second, for capacity allocated to eligible subscribers under some pretty specific criteria. The project needs to be within the preferred load areas designated by Con Edison's load area map, which are generally in proximity to those peaker plants. It needs to be sited within one of the designated interim disadvantaged communities. At least 40% of the project capacity must go to local community residents. And very importantly, the marketing and implementation plan has to include close partnership with community stakeholders and local organizations. Next slide, please. So I think this is one of the most important slides in the presentation. This is the block structure that we are proposing for the initial rollout of the program. So for those projects that are upstate and have received the MTC or community credit or phase 1 NEM, we're proposing an adder of 5 cents a watt. That's for the capacity dedicated to eligible subscribers, and we'll initially release up to 150 megawatts of incentivized capacity. So just to hit that last point, this is 150 megawatts within projects that are dedicated to eligible subscribers. So if, for example, there's a 5 megawatt project that dedicates the minimum requirement of 1 megawatt, that counts as 1 megawatt from this 150 megawatt capacity block. If that 5 megawatt project is fully dedicated to eligible subscribers, it counts as 5 megawatts. I explained that in more detail just to emphasize that the total size of the projects that will be receiving adder funds in some proportion, we expect will be significantly higher than the numbers listed here, because many will only receive the incentive on a percentage of their total capacity. So 5 cents a watt for older upstate projects, 10 cents a watt for upstate projects receiving the community adder. And then for projects upstate that have not received the community adder or other specific incentive for community solar, it would be 20 cents a watt. And this is really for projects that have moved forward since the community adder was exhausted in January. Finally, for Con Edison, it will be 10 cents a watt across the board. Now, if you are kind of adding up these totals, multiplying across, you'll see that we're a bit below the 500 megawatts we described. The budget number we initially described. We do have some additional budget that can be applied to this program. Our plan is to open it up and to see the level of uptake in these initial blocks, and to, if we do get a really response, to add capacity and make any needed adjustments. So I'm just going to leave this up here for just a minute longer for folks to absorb it. And And again, this will all be recorded. This will all be sent around very shortly. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so the next topic is the structure of the payment of the added incentive. So what we proposed was for that payment to follow the timing of the current commercial industrial program. For those that aren't aware, when a project in a commercial industrial program is completed, half of the incentive payment is made at that time, 25% is made at year one, and the final 25% is made at the end of year two. That is the same structure we proposed for all projects receiving this adder. The purpose being that we understand that a lot of the investment in customer acquisition and marketing and so on happens up front. However, we did want to have a lot of direct visibility and the ability to adjust based on performance for the first few years of a project when there is likely to be the most churn. To back that up, we were requiring documentation prior to each payment. We also proposed providing similar reporting for the next 3 years of the project. This allows us to do kind of program level monitoring. Finally, we put some rules in place for how we would handle the situation if a project reduced its proportion of eligible subscribers over time. Next slide, please. So we got relatively limited feedback on this item. Some people were in favor of the three-part schedule or the three-piece incentive payment schedule we laid out. We did have at least one commenter, but relatively few suggest an even longer payment schedule. The concern there, of course, would be a situation where the makeup of the project would change considerably after the first 3 or 5 years. We got some comments in favor of a full payment being made in the first year, primarily pointing to the upfront investment in customer acquisition. And then finally, we had sort of a mixed reaction to, the idea of NYSERDA being able to recapture incentive funds in future years if performance is reduced. So next slide, please. So on the balance, most of the comments were kind of neutral or favorable to the schedule that we put out there, and it does balance the think legitimate comments that most of the the investment that the incentive seeks to offset is upfront, with the need for NYSERDA to be able to see at least a few years of track record on a project. So we're maintaining that structure. Likewise, we're maintaining the reporting requirements, but we really couldn't find a good mechanism for any sort of clawback or recapture after the payment period ends, meaning after all the funds are paid out. Though, as it notes here, if there is a significant drop off during the reporting period, that company, depending on the circumstances, may not be eligible to participate in the community solar adder in the future. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Max. So I will be talking about our next steps and our release timeline. Next slide, please. So for next steps, what we presented today is the proposed final design of the program. With that being said, we are interested in hearing any final feedback you have, especially any glaring omissions or concerns. We really intentionally, I will say that we structured this presentation intentionally to transparently show all the feedback that came in and the decisions that we made based on that feedback. But as I said before, if you think we missed or omitted anything, or if there are concerns, you can express them in this final feedback process. So you can provide final feedback two ways. First, the written feedback can be provided between now and April 9th. You can just send an email to our Community Solar inbox. Just remember to use the email subject line listed on the screen so that we don't lose track of your comments. You can also request a phone call to share your feedback with us, and we will be conducting those calls the week of April 5th. If you would like to have a feedback call, please reach out to Dylan Cunningham. His email is on the slide by April 2nd, and he will schedule the time. Next slide, please. And finally, our release timeline. We plan to conduct our final feedback over these next few weeks, and then we will consider and potentially incorporate that final feedback into the final design. Our plan is to then release the final program rules by April or May, and to have the adder available by spring or summer of this year. Next slide. And so that is the end of our presentation. We now have some time for questions. As Max mentioned before, we ask that you ask clarifying questions about what we presented. If you have comments about the design, we encourage you to submit written feedback or to set up a feedback call through Dylan. So we're actually going to take a few minutes to look at the Q&A, and then Max will kick it off by answering some of the questions that have come in. So just give us a couple minutes. And while we're looking at the questions, I will say, thank you very much, Dylan, that we will be sending a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the presentation slides. And then the recording itself will be on our website. We'll provide a link to where it will be on our website by Monday, April 5th.
All right. Hello, everybody. This is Max Joel. I'm going to kick off by answering some of the really quick questions that are really just clarifications on what was presented. We do have limited time, so there will be questions that we won't have time to address. And there's also some questions that I think we're going to want to follow up with the person asking them just for some clarification. We are making a record of every question being asked, and we'll follow it up, but also feel free to reach out directly to NYSERDA in the way Sarah described. So just getting started here. Okay. There was a question about the definition of the interim disadvantaged communities and the source for a map. So that map is available on NYSERDA's website. I believe it's nyserda.ny.gov slash slash disadvantaged communities. Obviously, if you Google NYSERDA disadvantaged communities, it will take you right there. Yes, nyserda.ny.gov slash ny slash disadvantaged communities brings you to that map. That site also has a link to the DEC potential environmental justice areas, which were used to inform the map design. Sorry for the pause there while I loaded the map. Oh, so there was a a couple questions about the 10% discount minimum. One was its purpose. That directly is that to provide meaningful cost savings to LMI customers that are commensurate with the added incentive being put out there. There was also, I think, a point of confusion about the reference to the net crediting rules that require there to be a single percentage level across the whole project. Those were established with the net crediting order. They're kind of not directly related to this program. Outside of those requirements, if the project is not using net crediting or organized another way, it's completely acceptable for a project to have a sliding scale of discounted benefit. We had a specific question about this based on their income level or other factors. The incentive under with the inclusive adder would remain the same, but that project design is completely acceptable and sounds very promising. There were some questions about how the adder would stack with some of the other adders. I think we'd like to get back to everyone in more detail on that. Question on whether this adder would be in addition to the community adder or in addition to the community credit already received. The answer to that is yes. My previous comment was related to like brownfield adders. And some of those other additional adders in the program. A couple of questions just to clarify whether projects that are already operational will be eligible. The answer unfortunately is no. Clarifying question, will upstate CDG projects receive that 20 cent a watt adder if they did not get the community adder? The answer to that is yes. That's correct. Some questions about the relatively modest within the scope of New York Sun funds shown in that table, which is about $30 to $40 million. Are there more available? The answer again is yes, we can add funding to the program based on the performance uptake. Question about does the incentive level change depending on the mix of eligible residential versus eligible non-residential? The answer is no, but the level of eligible non-residential is limited to 40%. A lot of great questions coming in, and again, we will address all of them. I want to be respectful of time. Just trying to see, a lot of questions about the map. I hope my comment addressed it, but we will send around that link to everyone. Yeah, so other just kind of clarifying questions about how the percentage of the incentive is managed. So, a project, I think the example is oh, I've just been informed that we actually have 30 minutes left, not 3 minutes left. So we'll keep on going. Apologies, everyone. We went through that really efficiently. So with that in mind, the questions are still coming in and we have a long list. I'm going to go on mute again. I tried to hit some of the very fast ones. And we're going to circle up again and get to some of these longer ones. Though I will note if folks do have to drop off at the hour, um, we'll be, this is again recorded, we'll be having that opportunity for quite a bit more back and forth with stakeholders. So if you do need to drop off, that's totally fine as well.
So we had some questions about customer education and customer confusion. So I will say, we had some comments just about experience with customer confusion with community solar in general. We recognize that this is something that has been brought to our attention. We've definitely heard from customers themselves who have been confused about community solar, worrying that it's a scam similar to maybe what happened to them previously if they accidentally, or if they had signed up for a predatory ESCO. So, this is the reason why we're requiring clear and accurate marketing and hope to reduce that confusion. But if you have your own experience that you want to share with us, or you have suggestions to reduce that confusion and increase trust, please reach out through the feedback process. I just wanted to comment on that. We also had a comment just if there is going to be like a more distilled, if we were going to release something that clearly showed what the program rules will be. I think the commenter had said that this was a lot of information. We recognize that it's a lot of information. So number one, we're going to be sending the slides tomorrow. The recording will be available on Monday. It will be on our site. And then the final program rules, when they are released in April or May, they will also be go into much more detail. So if you're having difficulty digesting the information, we hope that you look at the slides. We hope that you, try to watch that recording again, and please reach out to us if you have any questions. I think there was a question about someone wanted to know if we asked people to identify their targeted range of eligible subscribers in the application, and they said, we asked for identify and justify. I don't remember saying justify. In the implementation plan, we do want to know what will be your targeted range of eligible subscribers. So if you can clarify what you heard, we can answer that question.
Sarah, I think justify was in one of the slides that I read about the brackets of like 20 to 40, 40 to 60. That's in reference to, within the implementation plan, explain, essentially if you're targeting 60%, how you get to that, quite significant bar versus the lower, 20 or 30%. So that might be a description of your marketing strategy. It might be, information about a affordable housing provider that you're including, so that you have a significant non-residential component, or other information or documentation like that.
Thank you, Max. So there are a lot of questions. I just want to reiterate this about, how can customers and communities know which projects qualify under this program? We really appreciate these questions. Please reach out to us, and we would love to talk to you during the feedback process to talk more about those comments.
I saw a couple requests for clarification about the balance between residential and non-residential subscribers. And that of course was one of a number of pieces of information provided in this very dense presentation. So no matter what, there's a 20% residential eligible subscriber requirement, period. That is because direct benefits to low and moderate income customers or disadvantaged communities residents is kind of the core purpose of this program. So a project that was exclusively say an affordable housing provider as the anchor, taking 40% of the capacity, that would not in and of itself qualify. Now, if that project had 20% of its capacity dedicated to eligible residential subscribers, which, by the way, could include the the tenants or residents of an affordable housing property. That's the anchor subscriber. As long as those are the residential meters, that would qualify. So again, 40% anchor affordable housing plus 20% of the of this capacity being dedicated to residential subscribers. that qualifies as 60% of the project being eligible for the incentive adder. I know that's a lot of math. It's sounds more complicated when I say it than when it's just shown on the screen in a table. So in general, we'll be really working on creating the clearest possible information for project providers and developers. And I'll also just underscore that very little, if any, of the information here is sort of necessary or intended as part of our general public or customer education. Meaning that from the customer's perspective, they would be subscribing to community solar with a community solar provider, generally just like any other customer who might not happen to be eligible for this program. The individual customer would not, of course, need to know about the payment process, the project level eligibility information, and as we include and continue to expand the customer education on the NYSERDA website around community solar, it will be very much in mind of that direct here's what community solar is, here's why it might be a good idea for your family to save money and support the environment and so on, and not all this complex program information. This is really kind of the expert level presentation. Just a couple more, clarifying questions about project eligibility. Are new projects eligible? The answer is yes, they're eligible at that 20-cent rate in upstate projects, and any project in Con Ed is eligible for the 10-cent rate. And remember that 20 cents a watt adder rate is for projects that do not receive the community adder or had not received the community credit or MTC. We have some questions about master metered buildings. Those, a master metered building would be eligible. I think that's consistent with the general CDG program rules, but also, consistent with those rules, we'd require pretty clear documentation of how the benefits would be flowing through to the residents through sub-metering or another means. So, if you have projects using master meters, please reach out and we can go through the details there. But it's definitely a really important part of the strategy to be able to include master metered buildings in this program. I think a number of the other questions are either very sort of project specific, or they might just benefit from a review of the presentation once we get that out. But again, we are marking down all of these. We are going to follow up. I think we can connect the questions to the registration information, and we really encourage everyone to reach out. As Sarah described, this is really fantastic that we're getting so much interest and questions, and they're really, really good ones, and they're bringing up a lot of scenarios that I think we anticipated and are able to be accommodated within the program design we're putting out there. But I'm looking forward to digging into the details with some of the folks who have been on this call. So I think with that, we can wrap it up for today. I'll just once again express my appreciation to my colleagues, Sarah, who spoke on the call, as well as our other colleagues who supported the development of the program and the presentation today. And just again, thank you to everyone who submitted comments on the RFI. It's so helpful. I hope you've seen today that we incorporated a lot of that feedback and made some significant and beneficial changes. And again, we're looking forward to working through the final details with you as well. So thank you very much and have a great afternoon.